be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while we play video games and talk about life stuff. So as I continue to bring you guys some DC related content, what I want to do is I want to get current. There are a lot of great stories that have been going on in DC over the course of its history. We talked about Teen Titans, we've talked about Batman Beyond, we've talked about Harley Quinn, but I want to look at stuff that's going on right now. And specifically, I want to talk about Superman Rebirth. And the reason why is because, Superman is the face of DC Comics. He's one of the most recognizable symbols in the world. And so it makes sense that we would use this as kind of a jumping off platform to begin consistently providing DC content on the channel. And so with Superman Rebirth, what I really like about this is it is the quintessential example of what DC Rebirth means. And what I mean here is the whole idea of the Superman Rebirth not only comes out of the death of the New 52 Superman, but it comes out of the pre-New 52 Superman. And what I mean by this is prior to, or I guess when the New 52 launched, people didn't really care for the new Superman too much. They were curious to see what he was about, but as time progressed, we saw that the New 52 Superman was emotional. He was very human in terms of how he functioned. He let his emotions get the best of him sometimes. He would get really angry. He would freak out. There were times when he just was not the Superman that we had come to know from reading comics before the New 52. And so while there was some give and take, while there were some who loved him, some who didn't, on the whole, the vocal minority was very, very loud about what it was they didn't like. And so what DC did is they gave us an event called Convergence. Now, Convergence was very confusing to a lot of people. And so in order to make it really, really simple to understand, basically what DC had said was that all the points in their history, all the major events in their history, from Crisis on Infinite Earths to, 0 Hour Crisis in Time, some of the major story arcs like Roy Harper, people finding out he was addicted to heroin, these were all captured in a bubble of sorts by the villain Brainiac, and it was just held in stasis. And so with Convergence, all these realities were let loose and they all just started fighting each other. But for a majority of these moments, it was just kind of a last hurrah. It was just DC's chance of saying, hey guys, here's your last bite of the apple. Here's your last chance to say goodbye to these characters. You're probably never going to see them again. But for Superman, it was a test. It was a test bed. It was the question, do people prefer the New 52 Superman over the pre-New 52 Superman, or vice versa? And so because people loved the pre-New 52 Superman story as it was part of Convergence, what DC did under Dan Jurgens, I think it was, they gave us Superman, Lois, and Clark. And this story was done by virtue of what's called a retcon. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what retcon is, that stands for retroactive continuity. And what it means is that a comic book publisher will create something and then use that thing to alter the history of their comics. So the pre-New 52 Superman is a really good example. When Convergence ended, the various superheroes who had been part of that event were offered the option to either go back to their own realities, so their own timelines, or to go somewhere new. And so what ended up happening is the pre-New 52 Superman, his wife Lois, and I think their child was unborn at the time, ended up in the modern day. They ended up in the New 52, the beginning of that continuity. We didn't know this when the New 52 first launched. When the New 52 first started in 2011, we just got the New 52 Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Batman, Green Lantern, Cyborg, so on. They came together as the Justice League, they fought Darkseid in their first 6 issues, and things just continued on along their normal stories. The retcon came into play when Superman, Lois, and Clark revealed that when Convergence ended, the New 52 Superman ended up at the beginning of the New 52, and he had seen everything. He was there, he was watching on when the Justice League first fought Darkseid. And this is where DC Rebirth really comes into play, because for those of us who were reading before the New 52, for those of us who preferred things before the New 52, the pre-New 52 Superman was our eyes and ears. When he stood on and he watched the Justice League, who were composed of superheroes that he knew but were different variations of the ones he knew, it was us watching characters that we were not familiar with going against a villain that we were familiar with. When Superman said that he had fought Darkseid on countless occasions and knew how to defeat him but wanted to see if the new Justice League could do it, it was us as readers watching alongside Superman when those events unfolded, because in the pre-New 52 we'd seen where Superman had fought Darkseid on countless occasions, on a multitude of occasions, and defeated him every single time. And so it was a way for us to relate to what was going on in the New 52. It was basically a way for us to stand in the New 52 and to say, okay, we are basically this pre-New 52 Superman. We are in a new universe that we don't really understand, that we don't really know anything about, that has characters that are like the ones we know, but they're different at the same time. Now, fast forward to the end of the New 52. Of course, the New 52 Superman died, and there's a whole another series on that, and I could probably do a video on it if you guys are interested. But suffice it to say, when DC came along with DC Rebirth, the idea was take what worked and blend it with the New 52. And so they basically gave us the pre-New 52 Superman as the current Superman, as the Superman that exists right now. Now, in terms of Superman Rebirth, the actual standalone issue, this was basically DC telling us the New 52 Superman is not going to come back. And the reason why we know that is because with the pre-New 52 Superman, he died fighting Doomsday. All right, he was effectively beaten to death, but we also know that he came back to life after being placed in a regeneration matrix. And this is his line of thought. Because he came back with a regeneration matrix, the other Superman can do the same thing. And so he encounters this New 52 version of Lana Lang. Now this is interesting because Lana Lang in the pre-New 52 landscape was a childhood friend of Superman. She grew up with him. There was, romantic tension between the two of them, but nothing ever really came of it. Of course, we know that he went with Lois Lane, they got married, they produced a child, but this New 52 Lana Lang is not really the one that he remembers. She's similar, but they're two distinctly different people, and that relationship between the two of them just doesn't exist anymore. But he tells her that he came back to life because of a regeneration matrix, and it stands to reason that the Fortress of Solitude in the New 52 possesses the same regeneration matrix. And so when the two of them travel to the Fortress of Solitude, they actually learn that there is no regeneration matrix here. And again, this is just DC telling us the New 52 Superman is dead. He's gone. He's never coming back. And this current, pre-New 52 Superman is going to be the new Superman from this point going forward. Now, having said that, the actual story that we're going to be talking about today picks up with this new Superman and how it is that he relates to his son, Jonathan. Now, I hope I haven't really confused you guys, up to this point in terms of the different variations of Superman, so on and so forth. If I have, post a comment down below and I'll try to clear any confusion that might exist. But with this new Superman, of course, we have him and Lois Lane and Jonathan staying isolated. But at the same time, this presents a really interesting situation. And the reason why it does is because for Jonathan, he idolizes his father. He knows that his father has incredible powers. He knows that his father can do incredible things. But the issue here is that Jonathan himself is largely restricted in terms of what it is that he can and can't do. Now, this is actually a really cool concept. And the reason why I like this so much is because DC does not immediately paint the picture Superman is great and Jonathan's gonna be great too. Instead, it humanizes Jonathan as a character. And it tells us, much like you or I or other people who grew up as children, we couldn't just do everything that we wanted. But the idea, the purpose behind, Superman and Lois Lane restricting him this way is to teach him responsibility. It's to teach him what it means to be a responsible, contributing member of society. Now, this does not go without hard lessons. With Jonathan being told that he should never use his powers unless he's under the supervision of Lois Lane and Superman, he's initially hanging out with their cat Goldie, and Goldie's attacked by a hawk. And in his attempt to defeat the hawk, his emotions get the best of him. He lashes out, he uses his laser vision, and he destroys both the hawk and Goldie. Now, the reason why this is a very important moment in the life of Jonathan is because he's learning that he has to control his powers, but at the same time, he's learning that he does have powers. He always assumed that he would have the same capabilities as his father. It was kind of this accepted standard just because of the fact that he was the son of Superman. He had those genes, and it was something that they told him about when he was younger, but he's at an age now where his powers are going to begin to start manifesting. And much like anybody going through puberty, it's going to be a very confusing time for him. He's not really going to know how to handle what it is he can and cannot do, but we're actually going to find this is going to be a little more difficult to understand than is initially being made out to us. But the fact remains that there was actually a young girl who was named Kathy that saw him use his powers. And so what happens is later on that night, Kathy visits the home. Now, what's really cool here is, of course, when she makes her presence known, when she starts talking to people, Lois Lane asks whether or not Kathy has seen Goldie, because of course, both Jonathan and Clark say no, they don't know where Goldie is. And so Kathy says no, she doesn't know either. Now, she knows that Jonathan killed Goldie by accident, but she doesn't offer any explanation. What's also cool about this is that when Jonathan's talking to Clark or talking to his father says the reason why they keep secret identities, the reason why they keep their names hidden is because in truth, the world had just lost their version of Superman. And for Clark Kent, for this pre-New 52 Superman to suddenly show up and make his appearance known would take the world by surprise. Now, the fact that he has acted has just drawn the attention because there have just been people who have seen them. At the same time, when the New 52 Superman died, the pre-New 52 Superman was there. He didn't answer anybody's questions. They were all wondering who he was. They were wondering why he looked exactly or very, very close to the New 52 Superman, but he didn't answer any questions. He just basically took off. And so he didn't want to raise a whole bunch of eyebrows. And that's the basis behind this, is to keep Jonathan protected. But more so than that, there's a lot of dangerous people out there. And as a child, Jonathan just doesn't grasp how dangerous the world can be, how bad people can be. And so he just wants to go out, he wants to use powers, he wants to be a hero, but he doesn't understand that as a child, he's inexperienced and he could easily be taken out by somebody, or even worse, kidnapped and corrupted by somebody who would be able to take advantage of his inexperience with both people and the world as a whole. And so what happens is that night, after going to bed, after being sent to his room by Superman, Jonathan realizes that Batman and Wonder Woman have turned their attention and they've begun conversing with his father. Now, of course, because his powers are fledgling, because they're budding and they're really not experienced yet, Jonathan tries to overhear the conversation as best he can. And the initial indication that's given to us is that, you know, with Wonder Woman and with Batman and presumably the rest of the Justice League knowing about this Superman's existence, that they have questions about who he is. They have questions about his son's powers, the fact that his son's powers are not predictable, the fact that they're potentially dangerous. And this really seems to allude to the idea that the Justice League witnessed the fact that Jonathan had killed Goldie and the Hawk by accident. We don't know if they did, but we're kind of left to believe that they did. And it would make sense that they would be monitoring the family and would by extent know what it was that Jonathan had done with regards to that Hawk and cat. But the fact remains, they also become aware of the fact that Jonathan is keeping an eye on them. And so Superman appears, his father appears and says quickly and quietly, "You're coming with me." And so what we do is we transition to an iceberg out in the Arctic or out in the ocean somewhere, either in the north or the south. That's the only place where you find them. And there is a submarine that seems to have gotten stuck in this giant patch of ice. Maybe it just, resubmerged, or I guess, surfaced in this ice. We don't really know how it got there, but the fact is that it's there and Superman is going to try to get it out. Now, at the same time, this is a nuclear powered weapon, so there's all kinds of dangers that go along with it, but he's brought Jonathan along for the purpose of watching. Now, we don't initially know why Superman committed this particular act instead of just teaching Jonathan to do things at home, but the fact remains that Jonathan is there to watch his father, to see how his father acts as a superhero, to see how his father relates to people. Now, I would go as far as to say that this has a very important moral lesson, in the sense that with Superman, rescuing these various members on the submarine, rescuing the submarine itself, he overhears the conversation that they're having, and they refer to him, is he the new Superman? They're not sure what his intentions are. Is he there to help them? Is he there to take their nuclear weapon and use it on somebody in particular? And I would say that the reason why this was probably done by Clark Kent is because he wants his son to realize that not everyone who sees him as a good guy, at least not yet anyway, because they're just not used to the Superman. They're used to the New 52 Superman, who engaged in a lot of violence, to be honest, who engaged in a lot of conflicts, who became Doomsday and laid waste to a lot of what people knew and loved, and kind of betrayed their trust in several different forms. And so the result here is that while Jonathan doesn't necessarily seem to pick up on this, the fact remains that as Superman is greeting these various gods, as he's talking to them and kind of helping them get along their way, suddenly the group is besieged upon by some giant organism, some giant monster, and it has a disc attached to it that's controlling it. Now, as far as I've been able to tell, there's no real indication here on who put that disc there and what it is that disc is, why it's controlling that person. And it seems to just kind of be a plot device, but again, it may have been something that I missed, but the fact remains here that, of course, Superman instructs his son Jonathan to basically help him out here. Now, this is where things seem to come in, because it looks like Superman is training his son on how to use his powers. Now, Jonathan is initially hesitant here. His experience, the last time he used his heat vision, he destroyed Goldie the cat and he destroyed the Hawk. And so for him, he's terrified of what he might do, that he might actually kill his father. Now, of course, Superman says, don't worry about that. He can handle whatever it is, the energy, that his son puts off. And so Jonathan basically casts off his coat. He reveals his own little Superman costume, which is actually really cool, to be honest. Like the whole, S and the jeans looks pretty badass, to be honest with you guys. And he basically fights alongside his father, and he uses heat vision to destroy one of the discs on this giant octopus. Now, this right here is really a cornerstone. This is a hallmark of this version of Superman, and this is why DC Rebirth is so important here, because in the New 52, like I said, that version of Superman was very emotional. He was very down to earth. He was very emo. He was very human, but people didn't want that. People wanted the Superman that recognized you got to do whatever you can to do the right thing every time you can. And that's a lesson that he passes on to his son. What he says is that no matter what, because Superman himself represents what people should aspire to, because people on Earth will come to look at him as the iconic hero, his son needs to act accordingly, because Jonathan is a reflection of his father. When the time comes when Jonathan takes up the mantle and become Superman, he has to do that in a way that will uphold the values of what his father stands for. And so this is one of the most important moral lessons, because this is something that we wouldn't really see with the New 52 Superman. And so this is DC kind of, solidifying. This is DC telling us, look, this is the Superman that you guys know and love. This is the Superman that you guys are used to. This is not just some random guy. But as they're making their way home, we actually find that there's some sort of organism, some person who's watching these individuals, watching this event unfold, and realizes that Jonathan had accidentally spilled blood. And when he did, this blood had been detected, and it's apparently Kryptonian, or at least it detects the Kryptonian DNA in this blood. And then it says, let's travel to the Fortress of Solitude. And so we don't really know who this person is or what this organism is at the moment. But what we do here is we transition back to Jonathan Kent. And Jonathan Kent is basically hanging out, of course, with his, hanging out by himself, kind of taking some alone time, I guess, to maybe think about, the lessons his father taught him. And he's joined by Kathy. Now, what this portion of the story tells us is that not all that glitters is gold. And what I mean here is, because we would assume that Jonathan is the son of Superman, he would have all the same strengths and all the same weaknesses that his father has. Instead, this is not really the case. While the two of them are hanging out, while Kathy and Jonathan are hanging out with one another, Jonathan accidentally breaks the branch and goes crashing down to the ground and ends up going into a concussion. Now, initially, of course, Clark and Lois don't know about this. Instead, Jonathan is brought to their home by Kathy and her grandfather. And her grandfather, of course, believes Jonathan to just be an average boy. He doesn't know anything else to believe that he's the son of a superhero. And so, initially, the grandfather, I guess his name is Cobb. He simply just says, well, we could take him to a hospital. We can have somebody look at him. But of course, Superman's like, no. We'll take care of it. Go home, dude. Like, we really appreciate you bringing him here. And so while Lois is kind of unsure about this in the sense that, that Superman's being so protective, we learn that the reason why is because for Jonathan, this should not have happened. Jonathan should not have fallen out of a tree and been knocked unconscious. His durability should have easily allowed him to withstand, a fall from a tree that was maybe 10 or 15 feet high. And so for Superman, something's not right. Something's off. Something is a little strange. But the other thing you guys also got to keep in mind too, though, is that Superman is currently in a world that he's just not familiar with. He's still learning things. He's still learning what what this universe contains, the kind of things that function in this universe. And so for all he knows, there could be somebody who's been watching him this entire time. Maybe they slipped up and Superman just didn't know. Maybe they are able to avoid his super senses and they just ran up on Jonathan with a chunk of kryptonite. As far as he's aware, that easily could have happened. And so he's basically just a parent trying to understand why his son has succumbed to this kind of an injury. And so what we do here is we jump to the Fortress of Solitude. And with the Fortress of Solitude, of course, again, something to keep in mind is this is the Fortress of Solitude of the New 52 Superman. And so this is not, the Fortress of Solitude that we're used to from the pre-New 52 timeline. And again, this is why I say DC Rebirth is so cool, because basically the pre-New 52 Superman is adapting into the role of the New 52 Superman in all its forms and fashions, whether it ranges from his friends to his teammates in the form of the Justice League to even the places that he used with the Fortress of Solitude and the gadgets and so on and so forth. But this Fortress of Solitude is not being investigated by Superman himself. Instead, it's being investigated by the same source of energy that had detected the blood of Jonathan after the conflict with himself and with his father and that giant octopus. And so what ends up happening is this being begins to analyze everything inside this Fortress of Solitude, begins to analyze the computer system, so on and so forth. And when it emerges, it makes its presence known as the Eradicator. Now, this is why DC Rebirth is so cool. Because the Eradicator is a well-known aspect of the DC continuity. He's a well-known aspect of Superman's history just because his most prominent role was in Reign of the Superman. Even though he appeared before the Reign of the Superman event, that's his most prominent role in DC Comics. But in the next video, we'll run over that. In the next video, we'll cover more about the Eradicator. We'll talk more about his character and we'll get into everything that's going on with regards to him in the New 52. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section about the son of Superman. Let me know what you guys think about him. I think Jonathan's a really cool character. I really like him so far. He's struggling to find his place in the world. He's the son of a superhero and he's dealing with the kind of things that kids deal with, and so it's a really interesting situation. But anyway, let me know and I will catch you guys later. Peace.